Deputy Paul Murphy.
Thanks, Laskin Corla. Taoiseach, workers have been treated appallingly during this pandemic. The frontline health workers, student nurses, Debenhams workers, Arcadia workers, taxi drivers, artists, the list could go on and on. But amongst all of the cases of abuses of groups of workers, the treatment of workers in meat plants stands out as particularly shocking. Low-paid, highly exploited, often migrant workers. Workplaces where a regime of fear and intimidation often exists, where almost 50% of workers say they face bullying, and where COVID has run rampant over the past year. I know of one worker who spoke up about conditions in the factory, including on social media. As a result, the employer didn't sack him, because then he could take out an unfair dismissals case. Instead, he kicked him out of his accommodation. Because for many working in these plants, the boss is not just their employer, it's also their landlord. These workers have been abandoned repeatedly by a government which is more interested in appeasing the beef barons than protecting the health of workers and the wider community. Today's HPSC report reveals that out of 56 meat plants in the state, there are 34 open outbreaks now. That's an extra 4 outbreaks in the last week. Almost 2/3 of meat plants across the state have COVID cases in the last 28 days. In the Larry Goodman-owned ABP Bandon plant, 70 out of 300 workers have tested positive for COVID. It's clear that the big beef barons are putting their wealth before their workers' health, and the government is letting them away with it. SIPTU have reported that the level of serial testing has been cut back in recent months as well. None of this should come as a surprise to the government. It's now 10 months since I first raised it in the Dáil, with the response then from the Minister for Agriculture accusing me of smearing the meat factory owners. When the scale of the COVID outbreaks became clear, the government was forced then to feign concern. Last September, the Minister for Agriculture told the Dáil that the issue of sick pay for meat factory workers was being addressed. But nothing has changed, Taoiseach. 90% of these workers still do not have sick pay. Many feel compelled to go into work even if they feel sick. I've asked the Minister about this repeatedly and have got no response. My questions are very simple, Taoiseach. Will the government act now to ensure that sick pay is introduced for meat factory workers? Will it step up serial testing in the meat plants? And will it extend the eviction ban to cover those in so-called tied accommodation to stop meat factory workers and others being kicked out of their accommodation for speaking out?
Thanks very much, Deputy, and good to see you here at Leaders' Questions. I'm not sure if this is your regular slot or whether it's a consequence of your decision to join People Before Profit, but look forward to some interesting exchanges, I'm sure, in the months ahead. Just first of all, let me be very clear. I don't have the slightest bit of interest in beef barons. I've never met a beef baron. I don't know what a beef baron looks like, quite frankly. That's a populist conspiracy theory, and it has no legitimacy whatsoever. In relation to meat plants are a high-risk environment, not just in Ireland. We've seen very serious outbreaks occur in meat plants all over the world, in Europe and in America. And as we learn more and more about the virus, we know that it's to do with the conditions in the plant itself, more so than living conditions or transport conditions, although that can be part of the picture. It's to do with the air, the speed, the flow, and the fact that people are in quite close quarters and can be, and the fact that often there's a lot of noise. And that's why we now understand they are a high-risk environment. There had been thoughts previously that it was related to living conditions and transport, but that doesn't seem to be the major factor, because people living in similar conditions don't have as high a rate of contracting COVID. What are we doing about it? Serial testing for a start, which you acknowledged, that we're carrying out serial testing in our meat plants. I understand that the incidence is low. I don't know the exact figures now. I believe it may be substantially lower than 3 or 4%, which is the current rate in our community for symptomatic people. I think it may even be less than 1%. So that's encouraging that the number of positives is so low. I do think there is an opportunity for greater use of antigen testing. in meat plants and in other workplaces. It's happening in construction. Kerry Group are doing it. Combi Lift are doing it. I'd like to see the meat industry doing it as well if they're not. In terms of sick pay, I think it's really important we get this message across. Anyone, no matter where they work, is entitled to the enhanced illness benefit. If they have COVID, if they have symptoms of COVID, if they're waiting for a test, if they're waiting for a test result, if they've been told by the HSC or their GP to isolate, it's €350 a week and can be paid for up to 10 weeks. And I really think it's important that message comes across, because sometimes I think when workers hear that they're not entitled to sick pay, they think that means they're entitled to nothing. That's not true. Anybody, no matter where they work, any employee, any worker is entitled to €350 a week in the enhanced illness benefit. And we are bringing through legislation to extend sick pay to all workers, something I'm determined to do, having built on other things that I've done in the past to extend workers' rights, or rather social insurance rights to self-employed, which I did as Minister for Social Protection as Taoiseach, increasing the minimum wage to one of the highest in Europe, bringing in things like paternity benefit, parental leave, real things that we've actually done for workers, something that I don't think you claim to have done. Adding to that now is going to be sick pay, and we anticipate having that legislation done this year.
Deputy Paul Murphy.
Thanks. Taoiseach, if it's a populist conspiracy theory that the government represents the interests of the beef barons, not the interests of the workers, why, 10 months after this issue was first raised in the Dáil, have you not acted to introduce sick pay for meat factory workers? It's a very simple question. If the government does not represent the interests of the beef barons, who had sales of €5 billion in 2018, huge money, well then, why has serial testing been reduced at the plants? If the government does not represent the interests of beef barons, why is it the case that employers who have their employees in so-called tied accommodation are not covered by the eviction ban? Why are they able to evict their workers if they speak out? I think there is lots and lots of evidence, unfortunately, to suggest from the very start when this issue was raised and the government's response was to dismiss it and to deny it and to talk it down, that the government has consistently had the back, not of the workers, the workers need support, but of these big beef barons. Thank you.
Taoiseach to reply.
Thanks, Deputy. The job of any government, or at least any centrist government, is to represent all of the people, to take account of all interests and not seek to divide, to create conspiracy theories about the 1% or dividing capital from workers or the middle class from the working class. Any responsible government, any centrist government, any moderate government, and that's what we have in Ireland, tries to represent the interests of the whole population as best we can and takes into account all of the factors at play. And workers need jobs. And we always have to bear that in mind in our policies too. In relation to the question around sick pay, once again, I think the message has to be put out there loud and clear in case any worker gets the wrong end of the stick. Everyone in Ireland is entitled to the enhanced illness benefit. Any worker, that is, who is off sick as a consequence of COVID is entitled to that €350 a week. And we are bringing in legislation to extend sick pay, not just to meat plant workers, but to all workers who don't currently have a sick pay scheme. And that legislation I intend to publish before the summer recess, and hopefully with your cooperation we'll get it through. I imagine as is often the case, you'll find a reason to oppose it.
Thank you,
in relation to serial testing, I'll have to check on that. Probably because the risk profile has fallen and the number of positives is so low, but I don't know that for sure, and I will check on that.
Thank you. We're over
and I'll
time.
also check on the issue of tight accommodation.